Chapter 10. February 22nd. Rio is really into his sake recently. He must have developed a taste for it when out drinking with his colleagues. After saying goodbye to Rika on the platform, I went to get my stuff, which I'd secreted in a locker when she wasn't looking, and hung out in the souvenir shop inside the ticket gates, although I had no intention of buying anything. I had to catch the bullet train and head to my hometown of Kanazawa. I hadn't the slightest intention of exploring Niigata any further, or of going to meet my parents. I had just one aim. Once that was completed, I had to return to Tokyo, head for the house in Kawasaki, and do my best to keep my cool. I went down the escalator to the correct platform, wheeling my suitcase. The train was pulling into the station, dusted in snow. Before boarding, I took my phone out of my coat pocket and switched it off. These days it was only Rika and Rio who ever contacted me, but I didn't want them to throw me off course or interfere with my plans. If I was only out of reach for a few days, I could make the excuse that I'd lost or broken my phone. I took out the other phone I'd prepared in advance and turned it on. The handset was the same icy temperature as the air, and the dark, unwelcoming screen reflected my contours hazily. Settling down into the seat I'd reserved, before even leaning back in my seat or taking off my coat, I looked at the message from the only contact I had saved in my phone and immediately sent a one-handed reply, "Dear Jelly Wizard, today I managed to leave without my husband catching me. I'll be at your place tonight. You're the last person in the world I have to rely on. I'm looking forward to meeting you. Custard." Then I took out a notebook and noted down my finds from my visit to the police station in Niigata with Rika. On my to-do list, I crossed out "Go to Kanazawa," then memorized the list of things still remaining. My findings from my research of the last few months are beginning to come together with what emerged yesterday at the Kajii residence. If my line of thinking is correct, Kajii has a collaborator. Maybe, like Rika said, she didn't actually lay hands on anybody, but in that case there must be a fourth man, who killed the others according to her instructions. That person has made an appearance already, both in her testimony and in the investigation. I have to go about this carefully, take one thing at a time, not become impatient. Before too long, the train pulled into the city in which I was born. Stepping out onto the platform, I was enveloped by its gentle, cold air, very different to that I'd experienced in Niigata. A smell like burnt grass grazed my nose. I felt irritated by the wave of nostalgia that rose up in me. I climbed into a cab and gave the address of my parents' home in Korinbo, a Western-style building with a red triangular roof built in the Showa era, standing in a classy residential district around the back of the shopping area. The kind of house that tourists would stop outside in flocks to take photos of. When the evening sun lit up the stained glass window on the first-floor landing, the Virgin Mary's face would appear in profile. Back at school, the other kids in my class had been jealous of where I lived, saying it looked like the houses you saw on TV. The flyers in the pocket on the back of the driver's seat were for my father's hotel, well known in these parts. If he needed to be putting flyers in taxis, I thought, business really had to have taken a turn for the worse. My eyes met that of my father's in the promotional photo. He had clearly been having Botox because his face looked even more artificial than I remembered it. The bright white of his hair made his skin, thoroughly tanned from the time he spent on his yacht, appear even darker. He was tall, with handsome features, and in his younger days had been scouted as a model. His eyes were very similar to my own, a fact I hated. It's the biggest hotel in the area. If you haven't got a room booked for the evening, you could give it a try. It seemed the thick-necked taxi driver in his 60s was monitoring me in the rearview mirror. When I made a non-committal noise, he said in a slightly malicious tone, "You won't need a reservation. It's empty as anything of late." When I was a child, our hotel was viewed as the best Kanazawa had to offer for its food and service. Yet when my father took over the business from my grandfather, the quality gradually began to decline. Outside the window, the sky was a far more cheerful shade of indigo than that in Niigata. The taxi pulled up outside the entrance to the residential district. As I was paying, I saw the taxi driver's eyes flit down to my wallet. It was stuffed to bursting with 250,000 yen in cash. I'd left my bank and insurance cards and anything else by which my location could be traced in a drawer at home. In the event that anything happened to me, I had no identifying documents on me. "I'll be back down in 10 minutes. Could you wait here?" I said to the driver and stepped out of the cab into the street where I'd been born and brought up. The house I hadn't returned to in 5 years appeared to me overly large, not unlike a haunted mansion. It towered before me, black and quietly menacing. My parents seemed to be out as usual. We had been the first people in the area to install a surveillance camera at our entrance. I went round to the back and put my key in the door. If it no longer fitted, I planned on phoning Mrs. Kijima and enlisting her help. The key turned, and I let out a sigh of relief, pushing the low wooden door open. In the middle of the back garden, through which a path ran to the kitchen door, stood a dog kennel. Inside was Melanie, seemingly smaller than when I'd last seen her. I had thought she might bark, but instead she turned a longing gaze on me, wrinkling her nose. I crouched down and held my breath, using her collar to pull her close. My eyes grew hot and my throat dry. Just knowing that Melanie was still alive and well justified having come all this way. "Do you remember me, Melly?" She and Rio were alike after all, I thought. My first impression hadn't been wrong. Burying my face in Melanie's warm back, I felt a deep sense of relief. Blood still pulsed through her small body. The fur on her throat smelled of sweet bread. "What is it that you like about Ryosuke?" I remember Rika had asked me that question, hesitantly, when I told her we were getting married. One of my former colleagues said quite plainly that she didn't think the two of us were a match, but I hadn't understood what she meant. My attraction to Rio, the man who resembled my beloved Melanie, had been immediate. Rio was far better loved by people than I was, and was the kind of person who could get along well anywhere he went without pretending. That much was obvious at a glance. I've always been drawn to people like that. Melanie's fur was stiffer than it used to be, and I had a harder time running my fingers through it. Her eyes were crusty with sleep. But I had my worries about her. Was she being walked enough? My parents would have tended to her out of the fear of what people would think if they didn't. And failing that, there was always Mrs. Kijima to take care of her. Melanie was a black and white border collie. The characteristic traits of the breed, obedience, loyalty, and trust, ran deep in her. She was just a puppy when she first came to our house, the Christmas of my 3rd year of high school, bought by my parents as an attempt to keep me close to home. She had, in theory, been a gift to celebrate my getting a scholarship to my first-choice university, but it was obvious that I couldn't take a puppy that still needed so much attention with me to Tokyo, or, indeed, look after her while I was still accustoming myself to living alone. Sobbing, I said goodbye to my parents' house, leaving Melanie behind. I had been hoping to leave with a greater sense of liberation, so their scheme angered me. Now I was about to drag the same poor creature away from the place she was used to. From my wheelie suitcase, I pulled out a carrier for medium-sized dogs and assembled it. I took off the lid and arranged several items inside so that they'd take up as little space as possible. Her brush, her lead, her bone-shaped toy, a portable toilet, a little bit of food, and a training pad. All things that I'd bought yesterday in the pet shop of a nearby mall, after Rika had left the hotel room. When we'd set out from Tokyo, Rika had been surprised at how much stuff I'd brought with me, but my luggage had been virtually empty. Tempting Melanie with a biscuit, I coaxed her inside the carrier. I took out a folded polyester tote bag, put the last of my clothes and toiletries inside, and then slung my empty suitcase and Boston bag into the corner of the garden. My calculations had been correct, and Melanie fitted snugly inside the carrier. As soon as I closed the door, she began to bark furiously, so I took out my notepad and scribbled a note in ballpoint pen. I thought about addressing it to Mrs. Kijima, but then it struck me that she didn't often pass through this part of the house. In any case, however much I hated my parents, I had to let them know that Melanie was safe. I've taken Melanie. She was mine to begin with, so I guess that's allowed, right? Reiko. I tore off the page and tossed it inside the kennel. With my tote bag and pet carrier in hand, I left the garden. As soon as I turned my back on the house, I could feel my breathing growing less labored. Suddenly my own behavior seemed to me a bit like a child throwing a tantrum, and I stomped the asphalt underfoot as hard as I could. Inside the carrier, Melanie went on barking. To Rio and Rika, I've always painted a picture of my home situation whereby I was the overlooked daughter whose parents wouldn't give her the attention she wanted, but the reality is a little different. In fact, it was me who cut the ties. To this day, my folks still try to get in touch and offer to send me money, but I bat off their advances. I have confidence that they won't report me for kidnapping Melanie. 15 is 76 in dog years. Starting tomorrow, I thought, I'll begin taking Melanie out for walks. I'll give her massages and sort out her fur. The list of all the things I needed to do grew longer by the minute, making me so dizzy that for a moment I had the impulse to abandon my plan entirely. Returning to the taxi with the pet carrier in my right hand and the tote bag in my left, I instructed the driver to head back to the station. Melanie was still barking, and he shot several glances over his shoulder with obvious irritation, but by the time we reached Kanazawa Station and boarded the bullet train bound for Tokyo, she had grown tired and fallen asleep. There was a sad look about her sleeping face, and I felt a pang for all the times I could have come back to see her and chosen not to. But now she was an indispensable part of my plan. I had no confidence I could pull this off alone, so I had to take her with me. I was selfish, and I exhausted the people around me. I felt fairly sure that everyone who got involved with me would come to regret it someday. I'm more like Kajii than I care to admit. As it happens, I've lied to Rika about a number of things. I told her that my parents' relationship had broken down although they continued to live in the same house, but the truth was that they always got on well together and were adoring parents with a romantic view of building a household. Mrs. Kijima did all the cooking and the housework, but that was just how things were, and as a youngster, not knowing the taste of my mother's cooking didn't bother me in the slightest. The three of us often ate out at classy restaurants or my dad's hotel, and at New Year and birthdays, we enjoyed the feasts that Mrs. Kijima prepared for us, all heartwarming memories. Our family lived affluently, no sacrifices were demanded of us, and as a result, we were all, for the most part, smiling and cheerful. Everything I wanted was given to me. I went to a local girls' school with a good reputation and had a busy schedule of extracurricular lessons. I can concede that the teaching and the knowledge I inherited from my parents form the cornerstone of who I am. When I think about it now, my parents' love for me seems a bit like that for a beloved pet, but I was always their pride and joy, and they rejoiced in what a bright and earnest child I was. From time to time, I modeled in the adverts for the hotel, and its most luxurious suite is named after me. Having got married as students, my parents always seemed younger than the parents of the other children in my class, and I was proud of them too. They seemed to me so beautiful, like a couple of young lovers. One day, in the spring of my first year at junior high school, while walking home from a piano lesson, I spotted my father strolling around Kenrika Park with a young woman who worked in the hotel. It didn't occur to me that they were having an affair, and I followed them as a kind of game, but I soon lost sight of them. The incident stuck with me, and I kept on wondering what it had been about. I told my mother what I'd seen, but she didn't look remotely fazed, saying, "Your dad is good at giving advice to young women, so lots of the staff members rely on him. He's always been that way, ever since university, when he'd do the same with younger members of the tennis club. It doesn't bother me at all." Behind these words, I sensed something peculiar. There were plenty of girls at school who followed me around and wanted to be friends, but I didn't have anyone I was close to who I could share things with. Thanks to the environment I'd grown up in, where my parents were my best friends, I'd not learned to seek a place where I belonged outside the home. Aside from my relatives, the only person I could talk to was Mrs. Kijima. One day, I decided to ask her about my parents as she was preparing dinner, and for the first time ever she evaded my question, a nervous smile on her face. I didn't give up, though. I persevered with following my father and observing my mother and carried on talking to Mrs. Kijima. As time went on, I started to see what I hadn't been able to until then. The turning point came when I hit 13. That both my parents had numerous lovers turned out to be common knowledge, not just in our immediate neighborhood, but among all the hotel staff and across the whole area. Their unique interpretation of marriage, I learned, had been passed down through the family, dating back to before my grandfather's generation. Their lovers included the nice men and women who had often visited the hotel and played with me, and who I thought of as uncles and aunts. In the summer of my second year at middle school, I presented my parents with the proof I'd gathered and accused them of infidelity. Initially, they both stubbornly denied it, but setting eyes on the photos I presented them with, they fell silent. Finally, with fear in their eyes, they met the gaze of their daughter, who had grown so icy in her attitude towards them of late that she seemed like a different person entirely. From then on, I would go on to experience that same look in lots of places, from lots of different people. Yesterday, Rika, my best friend in the world, turned it on me. Which means, I suppose, it's only a matter of time before our friendship will come to an end. Your mother is the only person I love, and she feels the same about me, my father said. His tone suggested he was simplifying something difficult for my benefit. No, it's you who doesn't understand, I thought to myself. That's not love. It's that you've become co-conspirators with one another because your needs match. I could feel myself glaring at them. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the scenery outside the window, never dropping the act of the poor victim. She can't have been that dissimilar in age to me now. In my memory, her appearance is irritatingly similar to mine, a smooth-skinned, delicate woman, reminiscent of a porcelain doll. There was nothing she wanted to express, no desires piercing her body. She was a tedious woman who caused no friction with anybody, who couldn't have caused any friction, even if she wanted to. Taking other lovers is what allows our relationship to stay fresh and what enables us to get along so well, my father told me. Our way of going about things might be a little different from other people, but I'm sure someone as perceptive as you can understand that adults have needs. We want you to know that there are lots of different kinds of marriages. I decided to put to use all of the knowledge I'd accumulated up until that point, all the debating skills I'd developed at school. Calmly and logically, I explained why their approach to marriage was mistaken, why it showed they had misunderstood love and responsibility. At first, my parents seemed flummoxed, then afraid of this daughter of theirs who had changed so much. In time, their expressions began to register their irritation. That was how I came to realize, for all their knowledge of literature and the arts, my dear parents weren't in the habit of thinking deeply about anything. They were, in fact, profoundly superficial people who were happy if they could spend their days enjoying themselves, surrounded by things they liked and which were pleasing on the eye. Eventually, my father got fed up with my talking. It can't be helped. I just can't have sex with someone who's so close that they feel like family. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on his face as he said this. The twist of his lips, the dark flash in his eyes spoke of an insatiable thirst for pleasure. Alongside his indulgence, I could also detect a determination, too, the determination not to change his way of life at any cost. This was a man who was content to bend the rules if doing so would feel good. I just can't have sex with someone who's so close that they feel like family. Since becoming an adult, I've heard these words in various different contexts. This line of thought, which has become so common all of a sudden, casts a contemptuous gaze on all married couples, indiscriminately. I suppose I must have been giving him a frosty glare, because my father hurriedly tried to smooth things over. I'm sure you'll understand one day, when you're older. But I am older now, and my feelings on the subject remain unchanged. Back then, the thought that went through my head was this: if I never come to understand the kind of pleasure that makes you lose respect for your partner, for the rules, I will consider myself fortunate. It was at that moment that I made the decision. I would reject my parents' way of life with everything I had. I would leave home and live entirely independently of them. I would go to Tokyo and build a new life from scratch, find new friends, a boyfriend, a job. I would never have sex with anybody other than my husband. I resolved that for me, sex would be exclusively tied to having children. I decided to remain a virgin until I married. It was around that time that I got my first period. As it turned out, my will wasn't sufficiently strong to uphold that promise to myself, but I did make sure not to sleep with any men with whom I wasn't seriously considering a future. My image of what an ideal home looked like was borrowed from the house of Mrs. Kijima, which I had visited so often since I was small. I would choose a man like Mr. Tajima, a cuddly man working as a middle school teacher, and his wife's double. It was my dream to become part of a happy couple blessed with many children. When I got to Tokyo Station, I changed to the Kihin, Tohoku line. Melanie was still sleeping quietly. Eventually, I made it to Kawasaki. My long journey was finally nearing its end. Inside the chilly stall of the station toilet, I wrapped a bandage around my wrist, stuck a plaster to my left cheek, and put on an eye patch. I left the stall and looked in the mirror to check that I had transformed into the kind of unfortunate, powerless woman I wanted to be seen as. By now, my makeup had worn off totally, and I was so tired that I had a natural pallor. I had to hand it to myself. The look was perfect. I got into a taxi outside the station and gave the driver an address 1 block before my destination. There was no way of telling where he'd be watching from, and I wanted to make him think I'd walked from the station. He lived in a small residential strip at the edge of Kawasaki's industrial belt. Right beside the house was a river with a grassy bank, the perfect spot to take Melanie for a walk tomorrow, I thought. The 3-story building was tall and narrow, shaped like a slice of cake. The place had originally been an office building adjoining a factory, which had gone bust 2 years before and been knocked down. If his explanation in court had been correct, then the kitchen and living room were on the ground floor. The first floor comprised the bathroom, toilet, and his bedroom, and the second floor was storage space. What he'd said about the thin walls and harsh winters seemed plausible. I could imagine that looking after his aging mother here had been no easy task. I knocked on the flimsy plywood door, pressing at the same time on the button to the intercom, which was blackened by soot. Steeling myself, I made a pledge that whatever happened, I wouldn't run away. After a little while the door opened, and I was hit by a rush of the sweet, stale smell that other people's houses have, but at 10 times the usual concentration. A flabby, round face with grayish skin stared out at me. Through his fingerprint-smeared glasses, our eyes met. A faint smell of semen and artificial flavorings stung my eyes, and I felt the nausea rising up from the pit of my stomach. But I was not going to turn back. I lifted my head, held my breath, and looked around the triangular space spreading out from the entranceway. A small kitchen at the back, and in front of it a living room with tatami flooring. A low kotatsu, foot warmer table, sat in its center, its perimeter littered with magazines and instant ramen containers. The blanket for the kotatsu was yellowing. I was stirred by the impulse to yank it off and toss it out of the window. Nice to meet you, I'm Custard. I'm Sonomi Ikeda. I was borrowing the name of a hapless-looking classmate of mine from high school. Taking care to ensure my voice was as feeble as I could make it, my nose grew itchy and I sneezed loudly. The itch quickly became uncontrollable and spread to my throat so that I choked violently. The same complacent lack of hygiene as I'd experienced at the Kajii's house confronted me from all directions. I held my breath again and stepped inside the flat. The door shut behind me. I heard him lock it. There's no turning back now, I said to myself. I'm Shiro Yokota. I took a good look at the small-framed, pudgy, middle-aged man in front of me. His voice was far more high-pitched than I'd expected. His small stature was reassuring. I could definitely take him on if necessary. I took another big step into the room, steeling myself again not to turn around. It sounds awful, what you've been through. I'm happy to help if I can. Make yourself at home here. You don't need to feel shy about it. Your husband sounds like a bad man. As he spoke, spittle built up at the corners of Yokota's chapped purple lips. The edge of his mouth was speckled with small white pimples. I knew his age to be 52, but his facial expressions and gestures were more like that of a student. He was clearly intoxicated by the show he was putting on of being a valiant knight in shining armor, apparently undeterred by his beer belly and graying hair. I observed him carefully. How did he see me? I couldn't detect any sign of lust, but I could tell that beneath his filthy sweater his heart was racing at the appearance of a new living body in his personal space. I pulled an apologetic face, exchanging the occasional glance with him. As far as I could see, the layout of the place was just as he had said. In November 3 years previously, Kajii had been arrested at Yokota's house. She'd been staying with him for 2 days. If you went by their version of events, they'd met in 2012. They'd started chatting on a dating site, hit it off with stories about their shared place of origin, and begun exchanging emails. Immediately before her arrest, realizing that her Meguro apartment was being staked out by the police, Kajii had crept out with just the clothes on her back and turned up at this house, whose address Yokota had given her, telling her she was welcome at any time. It was the first time they were meeting in person. Kajii described Yokota as a kind-hearted man, like an older brother. He hadn't touched her. They had slept in separate rooms, with Kajii staying up on the second floor. He had been so overwhelmed with gratitude at the meals Kajii made for him and her considerate nature that he had essentially proposed to her, saying that all he wanted was for her to live alongside him, that was enough for him. He testified that when she was arrested, he'd been astonished. In the courtroom, he had spoken at length about how lonesome his life had been after his mother had died, and how much he missed her. He had talked about Kajii's kindness and how much he had appreciated her warmth. The public had sympathized with him as a devoted, unselfish man, with little experience of women. Using the courtroom records and the internet, it had been straightforward enough for me to track down his address and real name. Since giving up my fertility treatment, I had bags of time on my hands. This last month, he and I had been corresponding through a dating site. My interest in him had been sparked by something Kajii had said when I'd met her in person relating to the number of men involved in her case. On the site, I went by the nickname Custard, and he by the name Jelly Wizard, which he claimed was a character from his favorite anime series. I posed as a housewife from Saitama in an abusive marriage. By not mentioning Kajii at all, and making out that I liked the same anime, I'd managed to squeeze a bunch of information out of him. Yokota was born in a hospital a couple of kilometers away from Kajii's house in Nagano, and his father had died when he was a young child. Initially, he'd taken a job in the computing department of a local rice cracker company, but the work had started to take its toll mentally, and he had repeatedly been signed off with stress. When his mother fell ill, the two of them had moved to Tokyo, where they had relatives around to help. She had died 4 years earlier. He had never been married. I knew that Kajii targeted idlers with no money worries. Sure enough, it appeared that Yokota owned the house he lived in. The possibility had come to me in a flash in Niigata was the mystery man who had gone after Kajii's primary school-age sister and who'd become the first person to understand Kajii, in fact Yokota. I'd been told that he was in his 40s at the time, but that was from a child's perspective. In reality, he may well have been younger. The court record stated that the two had bonded over the fact that they both came from Nagano. Had they not, in fact, known one another for longer than they attested? If so, the absence of a physical relationship between them would add up. Yokota's testimony had improved the public's impression of Kajii, if only slightly. Wouldn't it make sense that he was her co-conspirator, with whom she had been secretly corresponding for over a decade? 3 days. That is how long I'd told my husband I'd be staying in Kanazawa for. Long enough, I was hoping, to obtain proof that Yokota was a pedophile and that he was still in touch with Kajii. If I could show that proof to Rika, I'd be able to win her back and prove Kajii's guilt. I realized that Yokota was staring at the pet carrier dangling from my right hand. Smiling inwardly, I rested the carrier on the floor, opened the flap, and showed him Melanie's dry nose. I brought my dog Melanie with me. You don't mind, do you? I'm not so keen on dogs. You didn't mention that in your... Yokota trailed off. I was of course aware that he hated dogs. I had tracked down his blog, in which he wrote about his favorite anime series. From his conversations in the comments column with the blog's handful of readers, I had managed to put together a complete picture of him as a person. I'm sorry. It's just that she really can't do without me. I don't know what my husband would do to her if I left her with him. She's getting old and needs care. I had to get my way on this. I summoned the negotiating skills I'd acquired while I was working at the PR company, working to eliminate my partner's choices and leave no opportunity for counterarguments. My parents live in Yamagata, but we don't have a good relationship, and I haven't seen them in years and years. My best friend, who I've known for a while, is here in Tokyo. She's traveling abroad on business at the moment, but she'll be back next week, and my plan is to go and live with her. Could Melanie and I stay here until then? Just 3 nights. There was no way I could tolerate the stuffy air of this room any longer than that. I stepped into the living room, forcing Yokota to move out of the way and trampling across magazines and ramen cups as I moved, and went around opening all the windows. The air that filtered and smelled faintly of petrol, but it was clean and freely circulating, and I inhaled deeply. Far off in the night sky, the lights of what looked like an incinerator flashed red. Behind me, Yokota mumbled, "You're a bit different to how I imagined." I hurriedly affected a weak smile as I turned around to face him. I was lucky that I was petite and looked young, I thought. He had rejected a physical relationship with a full-bodied woman like Kajii, but maybe someone with a childlike physique like mine would activate his sex drive. That would be my chance to confirm his sexual predilections. The thought filled me with fear, but also expectation. Would I be able to fight him off if I needed to? As far as I could read the situation, though, he seemed hesitant around me. "It's okay, though. Do as you like," he mumbled, acquiescently. I wanted to clap my hands together in gratitude. "Where do you keep the vacuum cleaner?" Yokota scratched his head. His sweatshirt was peppered with dandruff. After a pause, he pointed to a yellowing sliding door. "You don't need to worry about vacuuming. You must be tired. You should sleep. The spare room's on the 2nd floor. There's a bed there, which used to be my mother's. I'll show you where it is. I'm okay for now." I didn't want to be in the same room with him and a bed. "You really don't need to clean, though. I don't have any cleaning products or anything like that." I smiled and shook my head. Amateurs tend to think that cleaning needs the right equipment, when in fact, making use of whatever is around to clean a room produces a space that feels even cleaner. Besides, I had cotton wool buds, bicarbonate of soda, and plastic gloves in my tote bag. I feel so bad about staying here for free. Cleaning is about the only thing I'm good for, so let me at least repay you in that way. With that, I headed into the kitchen. There I found a portable one-ring hob, a stainless steel sink, and a hot water dispenser, all filthy with grease and mold. Under the sink, I located a bottle of vinegar long past its expiry date that I guessed Kajii must have bought, together with a jar for storing rice. In the sink was a well-used sponge. That was sufficient. Yokota was still standing looking at me. "Are you sure you don't need to sleep? You must be tired. You've cut your hand and everything." Recalling at last the role I was supposed to be playing, I affected a pained expression as I sheepishly hid my wrist, then put on the plastic gloves. "I'm going to do the tiniest bit of cleaning and then I'll sleep. Please feel free to go up before me." I smiled broadly to shut him up. I had to deal with at least this kitchen and the room I'd be sleeping in. Luckily, the house was smaller than my own, so the task would be quick enough if I put my mind to it. When Yokota finally made his exit, I took off my tights and tore them into 4 strips. I tied up my hair and put on a mask, changed into a tracksuit that I'd brought with the intention of throwing it away afterwards, and took off my eye patch. Eventually, I planned to rip up those clothes also, and use them for cleaning. Using a piece of cardboard I found lying around and the pet training pads I'd brought, I created a toilet for Melanie. I found a comparatively clean-looking bowl, into which I poured bicarbonate of soda and water, stirring the mixture with a disposable chopstick I picked off the floor. I felt as though if I stopped at any point I'd be swallowed up by anxiety, so I kept on moving single-mindedly. I cleaned the sink, used the sponge to wipe the place down, threw everything on the floor into the bin, then vacuumed. Melanie emerged nervously from the carrier, sticking her nose into one of the ramen cups. I frantically whisked it away from her, pouring some water into a bowl that I offered her. I gazed down at the pale pink tip of her lapping tongue. I set my phone to play some music at a low volume to keep up my morale. After I'd worked nonstop for just under an hour, the ground floor was unrecognizable. The flooring was now totally visible, and the strange smell had vanished. Taking Melanie, I climbed the creaky flight of stairs to the floor on which Yokota was sleeping. The tiled bathroom and the toilet were horrendously dirty. I gave up on the idea of washing this evening. I found a container of toilet cleaner with a little bit remaining, laid some toilet paper over the seat, and then poured the fluid on. From through the green wall with its grainy texture, I could hear the high-pitched voices and frenetic music of an anime program. Every time Melanie sidled up to me, I would bend down and stroke her neck, from time to time offering her a dog biscuit or some of the food I'd brought with me. "I'm really sorry, baby. You're tired after that long journey, aren't you? I'm going to make somewhere for you to rest now." When I finally dragged my heavy body up to the second floor, it was past 4 in the morning. I stepped inside the room with Melanie, then closed and locked the door behind me. The room was an unusual hexagram shape, only about 12 square meters in size. Its only contents were some stacks of magazines tied up with plastic string, an electric heater, 7 empty cardboard boxes, a dusty plastic Christmas tree, and a low bed of the kind used for nursing that must have belonged to Yokota's mother. There was also a moldy-looking futon folded into 4. This was the room in which Kajii must have slept. The very thought made me feel like no amount of scrubbing would be sufficient to clean it to my satisfaction, but my physical strength was reaching its limit, and I kept my dusting to a minimum. I turned on the heater and decided to cover the futon in newspaper and sleep on it. Whatever happened to me, I told myself, Melanie would protect me. If Yokota were to force open the door, while I couldn't rely on her to bite him sufficiently hard to keep him off, I knew that she'd at least bark and alert me to the danger. I made a bed for her out of a pile of towels, but she seemed anxious in her new environment, padding round and round in circles and beginning to whimper. I had to do my best to keep her quiet. I called her over and massaged her, lying down on the futon as I waited for her to calm down. I pictured Kajii's large body occupying the space that mine did now. "Good night, Melanie. I missed Rika." A cold sensation spreading through my body alerted me to her newly unfamiliar absence. The truth was, I wanted to go on traveling with Rika forever. February 23rd. I woke up to the sensation of something soft and warm touching my cheek. It took me a moment to realize it was Melanie's nose. She was whimpering, so I scooped her up and brought her into the bed with me. She was getting old, I thought again. It saddened me how her nose was no longer wet. Sleeping on a futon covered in newspaper had left my body chilled through, and thanks to my late-night cleaning spell, I'd only had 2 hours sleep. Stroking Melanie's ruff, I found myself growing sleepy. But no, I thought to myself I had to get up. As I was making my way down the stairs, I heard Yokota's loud snoring. "Let's go for a walk before breakfast, okay, Melanie?" I put on the eye patch and applied plasters to my bare face, pulled on my coat, and stepped outside with Melanie. After my trip up north, the cool air of the morning felt soft. I heard the hammering of metal and saw trails of smoke rising up here and there, feeling with my whole body the town shifting into motion, as if wound up with a key. Melanie stayed by my side, her lead hanging limply between us like a ribbon, not taut as it had always been when I took her out for walks in the past. I figured that this recent change to her environment might well have been a stressor. I came to a flight of stone steps leading up to the bank of the river, having barely encountered a soul. The air by the river smelled of cool, wet soil, and I breathed it in deeply, letting the back of my throat swell out. Thanks to the haze in the air, the river appeared to go on forever, and the Kihin, Tohoku line cut horizontally through the sky. The wide-open scenery felt good. I passed a group of girls out jogging, the volleyball team at a local middle school by the looks of it, doing their early morning practice. I had heard that Yokota helped out with the admin at a local cram school, which was run by an acquaintance of a relative. The cram school was aimed at kids taking their middle and high school entrance exams, so girls of exactly this age would doubtless be passing in and out all the time. That detail of his life only strengthened my conviction in my hypothesis. "I'm really sorry this is happening. It's like I care about you too much or something." Out of nowhere, I heard Ryo's voice in my head. As I let my feet follow where Melanie led, I remembered his face, the feel of his hand. I feel weird about doing that stuff with someone when they feel like family to me. "You're like a younger sister or even a daughter to me, Reiko," a breakable thing, whom I love so much. I can get a bit rough with that stuff, and I never want to do anything like that with you. That was the first time I discovered Ryo's preference for rough sex. When I asked him how long I'd have to wait until we could do it again, he looked pained and said, "We will have kids someday. Please trust me. I need you to be patient for the moment." I'm the opposite of Ryo. It's with the man that I've chosen to be my family, and only with him, that I want to do it. As the boundaries between mine and Ryo's two bodies grew so close I could scarcely tell them apart, my sex drive, which had been so weak before getting married, grew stronger and stronger. I felt desperate to have sex with the familiar presence who was sleeping soundly next to me, utterly relaxed, our bodies smells so intermingled as to be practically the same. Ryo's words echoed my father's so closely as to be uncanny. I stood staring into the river until Melanie tugged gently at the lead, bringing me back to myself. On the way home, we passed a 24-hour supermarket. I popped in and bought bathroom cleaner and kitchen sponges, as well as some eggs, butter and other dairy products, seasonal vegetables and fruits, meat and seasonings. It wasn't at all expensive. This would be a good area to bring up children, I thought. In a 100-yen shop, I bought a thin, papery apron. I had no intention of being here for long, so I wanted to keep my expenditure to a minimum. When I got back to the house, I felt a wave of satisfaction to see the sparkling clean kitchen lit up by the morning sun. I remembered a recipe for pancakes made with yogurt and cream cheese I'd once found in a book called Anti-Aging for Dogs. I poured the mixture into a heated frying pan, cooking a whole stack of thin golden-colored pancakes one after another. Hearing the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs, I looked around. It seemed Yokota had finally stirred. "Can't you keep that dog quiet?" "It made such a racket last night I didn't get a wink of sleep," Yokota said, his tone so irritable he seemed like a different person to the one I'd met the previous evening. Now dressed in a black sweater and jeans, he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, one you might expect to come with a wife and children. If I'd messed up somewhere along the line, I might well have found myself married to a man like this. At this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if the neighbors complained. Then it's you who'll be in trouble. I found myself tensing reflexively. There I'd been, thinking that Yokota didn't have it in him to make demands of or threats to a woman. He seemed totally uninterested by the transformation that had happened to his house, sitting with his legs under the low-heated table and staring down rudely at the breakfast arranged there. "You're serving me the same food as the dog?" He appeared to have worked out that Melanie was eating the same meal from her dish on the kitchen floor. I smiled broadly, resisting his overt disgust. I was far more concerned about Melanie's health than pleasing Yokota. "They're just as tasty for humans," I said, taking an exaggerated bite out of one of the miniature pancakes. Yokota's expression remained stern. I couldn't suppress the irritation inside me. He'd presented himself as someone so helpless, fretting about his diet of ready meals, yet here was someone serving him proper home-cooked food, and all he did was find fault. This is why people like you stay single, I thought to myself. The longer I kept a smile plastered across my face, the harsher the words inside my head grew. Forget it. I'm not hungry anyway. He threw down his fork. My hatred assumed clear contours inside me. Pouring a cup of coffee, I said, "Is work busy at the moment?" "Yep." "How many children are there at the cram school?" "Depends on the day." This was like an interview, I thought. Over email he'd said often how much he wanted someone to talk to, but you'd never have guessed it to look at him. Now Yokota got up from the table without touching his pancakes, put on a down jacket with protruding feathers hanging from the wall, and headed for the door. "Don't go into my room. Under any circumstances." "Have a good day," I called out, but no reply came. Would the scorn I felt come leaking out, I wondered, regardless of how well I painted over it with a smile? I'd thought that wrapping a man like him around my little finger would be easy. I waited for the sound of the door closing, then darted upstairs to the first floor. As I suspected, his bedroom was unlocked. Did he trust me, or was he just careless? Or another possibility, was he trying to test me? It appeared as though his experience of caring for his mother hadn't smartened him up at all. Or maybe all of his tales of caring for her were in fact a lie. It seemed entirely possible that he had left all of that to relatives and care workers. The smell of sweat in his room was so strong it stung my eyes. I took in the yellowing futon left out on the floor, a rack crammed full of anime DVDs that looked ready to come tumbling down at any time, and endless figurines and posters with illustrated pictures of young girls. All of it just as I'd imagined. I set to work immediately. And yet, however hard I looked, I couldn't find the incriminating material I was after: actual pornography. I decided to take a look at the anime he appeared to have been watching most recently. With a rubber-gloved finger, I pressed the sickeningly sticky play button on the DVD player. Shoving his futon and the manga out of the way, I cleared a space for myself to sit. I had confidence that I'd be able to stand whatever scenes would appear, but in the end my sense of exasperation outdid any feeling of distaste. So much was demanded of the 14-year-old heroine. She had to be cute, innocent, strong, obedient, hardworking, and sexy. If this was all you watched, it stood to reason a real woman was going to seem difficult to handle and more trouble than she was worth. I ejected the DVD and booted up the PC on the desk. I'd thought in advance about options for what his password would be, but I still rolled my eyes at how simple a code it was to crack: the birthday of Jelly Wizard's heroine. I pored meticulously through his email and chat history. I found some conversations with Kajii, but they dated from before her arrest, and their content was more or less the same as what had been read out in court. Everything I found seemed to suggest that they'd met after 2012, and their relationship had developed in a short time online. Which meant that, placed in exactly the same circumstances as I was currently, Kajii had managed to win Yokota's love and trust. Starting to feel dizzy, I moved away from the desk, crouching down on the floor and wrapping my arms around my knees. I wasn't yet ready to abandon my hypothesis. Was it possible that, unperceptive as that would make him, Yokota had got close to Kajii without ever realizing that she was the elder sister of the young girl he'd targeted back then? It was plausible that he'd come to be manipulated by her without realizing it. Just like how I'd been guided to this place by what she'd told me, from the other side of that perspex screen. At our very first meeting, Kajii had somehow seen through me and perceived the things that I'd been covering up all these years: the distance between me and my husband, the fact I'd hidden my true feelings from Rika, how I never felt truly relaxed around other people, that my malice towards my parents was the main driving force in my life. I had liked my job. I'd given it my all, and I'd built up strong, trusting relationships with several people. And yet, in the same proportion that I'd done things right, I'd got things wrong. Whenever I put all of my energy into promoting some product or other, people would timidly caution me that maybe I was going too far. Through a number of conflicts, I came to be a person whom others spoke ill about. What a poor soul you are. Here am I, all locked up, yet you're far, far more lonely than I am. Rika's desperate to be my friend. She's adorable, isn't she? She's become so fixated by me that I've grown quite fond of her. It looks like you're about to lose her. Since the day I met Kajii, my mind hasn't stopped racing. Whatever happens, I can't bear to lose Rika. In a way, it's as if I've had a crush on her ever since we met in our first year of university. Feeling a warmth beside me, I looked down to see Melanie. I reached out a hand, touching her long, soft fur, slightly coarsened by age. I felt the stagnant sensation in my fingers disappear. Ever since touching that cow in Akiyama's farm, I had been dying to stroke my Melanie. How much I'd like to become the kind of creature whose very presence soothes, I thought, the kind of creature who can unconditionally affirm someone's existence just by turning their black eyes on them. The rest of the day, I cleaned for over 8 hours, transforming the bathroom, toilet, and the second-floor storage room so it would have met the approval of the most exacting of clean freaks. Come evening, I set about preparing dinner. I figured that someone like Yokota would feel wary of any dish that was new to him. After thinking it through carefully, I used the ingredients I'd bought that morning to make potato croquettes and vegetable stew. Yokota came home just after 7. Casting one look at the meal set out on the low table, he said, "I don't like konnyaku. And I don't eat carrots, either." He was lying. "But you ate the oden and the borscht that Kajii made you." I wanted to scream. You told her how delicious it was and asked for another serving. You poured the soup over your rice, making her frown disapprovingly. As Yokota stabbed at the freshly made croquettes with his chopsticks, he murmured, "This reminds me of her." Here we go, I thought, finally. I pushed down my exhilaration as best I could and served his rice with as nonchalant a face as I could muster. You mean the woman you lived with for a little while? I think you've mentioned her to me before. You met on the same site we met on, right? As I made my careful inquiries, I scooped up the soup with a ladle, avoiding the konnyaku and the carrots. In his emails to me, Yokota had boasted of how a woman had once lived in this house with him, neglecting, of course, to mention that Kajii had only been here a couple of days before she was arrested. Yeah, she'd make loads of different dishes that she'd set out on the table. It reminded me of when my mum was still well. It was a lot of fun, eating with her. She must have been a wonderful woman. Nah, she was ugly as anything. Fat, too. Fat as a pig. Saying this, he snickered, and I felt a shiver running down my spine. In contrast to his schoolboy way of speaking, his eyes flashed defiantly as if he were taking on the world. It struck me then that I'd encountered many people like this before, boys who approached the girls with an obsessive attachment, mingled with both desire and sadism. Luckily, I wasn't the type who people like that went for, but their cruel teasing and bullying of other girls that I witnessed in the classroom had stunned me. If you told the teacher or confronted them about it, you'd be ostracized not only by the boys doing the teasing but also by their female victims as well. My mother always said that was just how boys were, that they were shy, and so teased the girls they liked, but it still made me hate them. That hatred had informed my decision to go to a girls' school. When the topic at hand was Kajii, Yokota seemed like a totally different person. His gestures became animated, and he spoke so fast that it was easy to lose track of what he was saying. When you looked properly, though, there was something kind of pleasing about her roundness. She was fat, for sure, but just about within the tolerable range, I guess. Her skin was good or okay at least. When you were sat opposite her, she started to seem kind of attractive. She had a nice voice. Women are 5 times hotter when they've got nice voices. My voice is comparatively low for a woman. As I was thinking this, Yokota was going on about how Kajii's voice resembled the voice of an anime character played by a particular voice actress, seemingly oblivious to the dinner set out in front of him. I got the sense that he didn't really care whether I was there or not. I watched as the crispy spikes on the croquette batter gradually wilted and grew soft. She was really devoted to me as well. Even after his romance had ended the way it did, Yokota seemed to have learned nothing. If I'd had the same experience, I wouldn't have gone back to internet dating, and I certainly wouldn't have let a strange woman in my house again. Do you still love her? In response to this direct question, Yokota pulled an exasperated expression, the exact same face that boys my age had made at me when I was a kid. Maybe within this tiny body of mine was secreted the special power to make any desire in members of the opposite sex shrivel up. Were you romantically involved with her? Yokota sucked in his cheeks and pouted. No way. I couldn't do it with someone that fat if they begged me. Even when the woman in question was Kajii, I found it hard to hear a man denigrating a woman's appearance like this. I decided to change tack. You and her were from the same part of the country, right? Is it possible you'd met one another before, back when you lived there? I looked at him, determined not to miss the look that passed across his face. If we did, I don't remember it. Was it suspicious that he ended the conversation like this? He didn't comment on the taste of the food, either, which further fueled my irritation. He couldn't have faulted it if he wanted to. The crispy croquettes were a magnificent golden brown. I'd put in curry powder for maximum flavor and melted cheese hidden in the batter. Do you like the food? Yokota looked momentarily nonplussed by the question, then mumbled something incomprehensible as he chewed. He hadn't said a single word of appreciation this whole time. It seemed that, even if I did the same things as Kajii had done, there was something different about me. I had the urge to yell out, "What's missing? What am I doing wrong?" It was clear that the two of us despised one another. Would you prefer toast for breakfast? Or rice? Even the way that he snapped back, "Toast," As if it were totally obvious, I found almost unbearably objectionable. A desire that I didn't usually confront suddenly flashed before my eyes as if lit up in fluorescent lights. If only Rika were a man. February 24th. Breakfast this morning was home-baked bagels with bacon and eggs and homemade jam. I made these bagels myself. You know you can make them in a frying pan? Stop it, I said to myself, and yet I seemed incapable of preventing myself from seeking his approval. When I showed off like this to Rio, he would look impressed and stroke my hair, but this guy simply nodded, not showing the slightest bit of interest in what I was saying. Roughly what time will you be home? Did you go into my room yesterday? Knowing that if I gave a firm answer in either direction I was doomed, I smiled as ambiguously as I could. Yokota turned to me with the look of someone who felt they held the monopoly on common sense. Around me, he acted as though he were perfectly well adapted to society. Are you lying to me? You don't look to me like someone who's the victim of domestic violence. You don't seem scared of men either. The bandage on my wrist was long gone, and today, for the first time, I'd left the eye patch off, thinking it was probably no longer necessary. I'd underestimated him. It stood to reason that he might feel wary of me, and that it would top even his hatred. I found it bizarre. He clearly wasn't satisfied by me waiting on him hand and foot. And yet, Kajii had been accepted by him, and accepted with a readiness that had stunned the world. Well, whatever. You're leaving today or tomorrow anyway, aren't you? It shocked me to realize that I'd totally forgotten about that element of my plan. I felt far from at home here, but I hadn't yet accomplished my aim in coming. What's your real goal? Yokota's gaze was acutely direct. I found it stranger and stranger that someone with a sense of suspicion this healthy had managed to live with Kajii. Will you be back about 8? I responded, avoiding his question. I'll make something nice and warming for dinner. Try and be back as early as you can. I smiled, attempting with all my might to affect a maternal aura, but Yokota stared back at me as if beholding something horrifying. After the door had closed, I stood for a while at a loss. Melanie placed her nose on top of the table, gazing with interest at the remains of the breakfast spread. I gave her one of the dog biscuits I'd made, then went over to the sink and turned on the tap to wash up. The spray hit my face and I snapped back to myself with a start. What was I doing, trying to win him over like this? I could hardly believe my own behavior. What was I trying to achieve? How could I possibly attain a pass mark in this task I'd set myself? I was already well beyond an age where I could blame this on my parents. My plan was to make a cream stew with potatoes, onions, and broccoli. No carrots, of course. As I always tried to do, I'd curated a menu that took into consideration the physical state of the person I was cooking for and the ingredients I had at hand. The trick to making lump-free bechamel sauce was not to scrimp on butter and to add in the cold milk in one go. I wanted, at least once, to make a meal that Yokota would compliment. I felt like I couldn't leave this place until I'd at least got a pass mark from him. But hang on. This is... My hand gripping the ladle paused, and I looked up, through the wire mesh, at the sparkling clean extraction fan with not a single speck of dust on it. For a moment I felt a flash of satisfaction at what I'd achieved in such a short space of time. I hurriedly tried to push away the thought that was taking shape in my mind. If I accepted it, I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to my life as it was before. It would mean accepting defeat to her. The fan twisted before my eyes. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from voicing it. This is no different to living with Rio. The two were totally different people. Yet was I not exactly the same whoever I lived with? What I did was identical. I immersed myself in the housework, scrubbing and polishing away, making meals tailored to the needs of the person I was living with. I would ask again and again whether they liked it. There was no sexual tension, no flirtatious interaction. And then an uncontrollable rage would begin to form inside me. Could I really say that I loved Rio? I enjoyed being around him, of course. Enveloped by his large body, I felt a sense of safety. I valued him, and I felt total confidence that he felt the same about me. Yet I couldn't rid myself of the sense that if I stopped moving, the merry-go-round called our family would simply cease to rotate. If I stopped moving, then I wouldn't be loved. And if I was the one moving, then I had no proof that I was loved. What did it mean to be loved in any case? Was it to be needed? Why then, when I was helping people in this way, did I feel this hollow and miserable? I had begun to forget that I was here to help Rika, to prove Kajii's guilt. Owing to my own efforts, my sense of belonging was shrinking away. My breathing grew more laborious. Why was this house so cramped, so oddly shaped? The doorbell rang. A dull sound. Maybe it needed fixing. Had Yokota come back for something he'd forgotten? I sighed, wiped my hands on the front of my apron, and headed to the door. Melanie looked up at me anxiously, padding obediently behind me. It was just the same, whoever it was, wherever I was. Whoever might be standing outside the door, it wouldn't alter the fact that I was all alone in this world.